And checkmate. Welcome everyone, my name is Cody Scott, and in this video I have tremendous value to share with you, so get ready. In this video, we learn how to color grade your films to look like The Queen's Gambit. The Queen's Gambit is a popular Netflix TV series right now that sheds some light on the cost of genius. This iconic series is a cinematographer's dream. But that's not all the value that I have for you today, because I have something special lined up. I have the Queen's Gambit Power Grade. That means you can import this Power Grade into DaVinci Resolve and get the same exact look with the same exact node tree setup in a matter of seconds. That will save you the time editing and get straight to the fun part. Now, if that Power Grade is something that you are interested in, stick around to the end of the video so you can see how to pick that up. Lastly, if you're new to this channel, feel free to consider hitting that like button, that subscribe button, or that dislike button if that's something that you're into. Let's get started color grading. In order to better understand how far we can push the image and in which direction we need to take it, let's figure out what camera it was shot on. After further research, it goes to show that Red takes the cake on this one. I thought Arri was gonna have it, but it looks like the Red Ranger is the camera that they used to film The Queen's Gambit with Zeiss glass. Now, after learning what camera The Queen's Gambit was shot on, I was able to take my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K and set up a nice game of chess. Being chess enthusiasts, we wanted to do it justice. So we set up 5 lights around a chessboard, took our Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K and our Cinema Zeiss glass, the 85mm. Combined with the Sigma 40mm, we were able to capture images that just came out perfect. Now that we know what camera it was shot on, what lenses were used, and we filmed our own clip with our own Blackmagic camera and our own Zeiss glass, it's time to start grading. And the first step to recreating any look is to identify the color story. So I'm going to pull up a reference clip to one of the scenes from The Queen's Gambit. Option S will pull up a node that will allow me to pull up my effects and drop a color palette on the node. So now that I've dropped my color palette on my clip, it's time to inspect the color story. It appears we have a lot of salmon in the highlights and midtones. We do not have any absolute black points or white points. So it appears we have a cashew almond style color grade. Now, we still need to inspect with our scopes. So looking at the luma levels, it appears that they went for a very natural contrast. And they definitely have a lot of red happening in all of the image, not just the shadows and the highlights and the midtones, but it's everywhere. Let's see, and you can see some of this salmon color that we're talking about because it's being pushed. And in the lower parts of the shadows, this red and brown and the yellows up here, that's what you're seeing all around here. All right, so now that we know the color story and we've taken a closer examination of the waveforms and the scopes, it's time to begin color grading. I want to pull up my reference next to my clip so I can get a better read on data. I can do that by coming up to this left corner, clicking, coming over where it says current group, go down and click on selected still images. This pulls your reference clip and your actual clip next together, that way you can have a more accurate read. If you look at your scopes down here, you'll notice this part of the information is strictly coming from this photo, the Queen's Gambit reference. And then this side of the information is our video. So all that we're going to do is match up information, and that is how we color grade. So I'm gonna begin by building my node tree. Now for the fun. I went ahead and structured my node tree. My first node will always
be noise reduction. Next up will be HDR, and that is where it comes to life. Color for the third node, contrast and exposure for the fourth node. All right, so I'll begin by cleaning up the shadows, and then skin tones, the clean whites. I want to make sure my whites stay really clean, like the eyes that we see here. The pieces are a little bit more yellow, and because these pieces are white, I'm gonna have to key out the pieces. And then the dress. So we will be individually keying all of these items. Next up will be the look adjustment. After that, it's only appropriate that we add a little bit of pop. I'm going to add a vignette to make it more dramatic, sharpen up the image, and then some film grain. Now that we have our node tree built, everything properly organized and labeled, it's time to begin. So beginning with noise reduction. Come over to noise reduction, frames, 3, Luma, we're gonna do 4, break the chain here, 6, 6.2, and 1. And that just cleans up the shadows a little bit. Let's look here. You see that right there in the blacks? It just removes that little bit of grain and that colored grossness. It's just, there is such thing as good noise, but that's not good noise. So now that we have noise reduction, I'm gonna turn it off because that really does put some pressure on your system. I'm gonna come over to contrast next, and there's a reason for that. And I'm looking at the scopes here, and it seems like they really stretched the information, and that's really what we're trying to do, is stretch the information. So we're gonna do that using contrast and pivot. I'm gonna just try to match the same contrast, go way too far, and then come back. This is a technique I learned from Quasi. All right, we're gonna go too much and then come back, go too much and then come back, and we're getting there. And next we're gonna bring up that pivot just a little bit. And that's all I'm trying to do, guys, is match the same contrast that we're seeing here, and we are almost there. Bring those highlights down, gamma up. And that is looking good. That's just our first adjustment, and we're looking remarkable so far. Now that we have that contrast set, I am gonna move into color. Now, as we saw in our information, there was a lot of salmons, a lot of neutral colors. It is cashew, so we wanna make sure that we try to make it as neutral as possible. So I am gonna crank this to about 65. And I'm cranking it to 65 because I know as we continue to make adjustments, lift the shadows like we see here, start keying some things out, we're gonna lose some of this color as we go. So I'm gonna pump some color into there just to have enough to navigate through the rest of our adjustments. Remember, it's about small changes over a period of time. Try not to make them all at once, okay guys? Small changes. And because we're working with a little bit of desaturation, I'm gonna bring my color boost down just by 3. Next up is HDR. Now this is where the magic happens, and I'm so glad that DaVinci added this to their lineup. We're gonna just mess with the light, the shadow, and the highlights here. This is HDR. This really does stretch the image quite a bit, and it just puts it in the world you need to be. So looking at these skin tones here, it does look like they brought down the luminance level of just the skin. Now, a lot of this was definitely done in camera, and they definitely had the proper lighting for this. I got as close as I could to it, and I know I can take care of the rest in color grading. So this will adjust this part of the image that we're trying to match over here. Now, I'll go too far just so you can see what it's affecting, but then bring it back to where it needs to be. That's just one adjustment, guys. And do you see how close we're getting to the skin tones there? But we're not done yet because these shadows still need to be adjusted. And what I'm looking at when I adjust these shadows is this gap of information right here and this gap of information right here. I'm trying to make these look identical with that nice little curve in the shadows there. Because it kind of has that HDR feel to it. It is that lifted shadow look. These darks, I will bring them down a bit because I do want to keep those darks pretty close. Not all the way black. As you can see, we're not going completely black here like we saw in the color story. And then these highlights. That is going to adjust these highlights you see on the pieces here. Their highlights are so soft you can't even see them, but our lights were a little harsh, so we're just gonna take those highlights, bring them down. So just these 3 adjustments alone make the world of difference. All right, so it looks like we have the right color, the right contrast. It's time to get into the fun part, the grading. Now, one key about cinematic images is removing the color from the shadows. If you look into the shadows here, they removed the color from the shadows and then pushed some grain and a little bit of tint into them. So we're gonna try to do just that. Come over to your Luma versus saturation. Click where the shadows are roughly, just the lower part of the image, and then drag down that saturation. You can see it happening in the image right here. But you can dial it back just a little bit. And what you're doing is creating this curve, this neat, nice little curve that just removes some of the color from the shadows. Come over to saturation, turn it up to 1, and look at this, before and after. It's so subtle, but it works. Time to get that skin. So go over to your qualifier, click your little eyedropper here, and then start to go over your skin. Now you can see what you're doing if you click up here on this little magic wand. You can pull up what you're keying. All right, so crank that blur. I do want a little bit of clean white happening here. Not too much. Definitely get those clean blacks. Denoise it and it will remove all that grain that you see afterwards. All right, so it does look like I have the wall keyed. I have some of the board and some of this wall back here, but I only want to affect the skin. So you can do that, and this is typically the culprit, this low on the saturation. What I like to do is soften out the lows and the highs and just clean up the rest of the image just like that. Now, in order to get a good key, it will take time, guys, so you do have to be patient with this. This isn't something that's just going to happen overnight. This does take practice just to get it perfect, to really get that key on there. All right, so that got me pretty close. Now it's time to take a look at our vector scope. This line right here indicates the line in which Caucasian skin should be placed on. Now, it does appear that there is a little bit of yellow in our image, which is perfectly normal. Coming over to your color panel, your primaries, and just shifting a little bit to the right will clean it up. I'm going to come over to my midtone detail and just turn it down, and what that does is soften out the skin. Watch what happens when I crank it. It just gives it more grunge and more detail. So I'm gonna soften out the skin, probably to about 18 is okay. Now turn that off. You can see how it's just softened out the skin. Everything is coming together very nicely. The skin has shifted. Everything is looking really, really good. Next up is clean white, and this is a really neat technique that I learned from Quasi. So you come over to your gain, you turn it down. I go to about 0.96, click in the middle, come over to your luminance in your bars and crank them to about 1. And what this does is just cleans up your whites. It removes the colors from the whites, which results in a clean white image. And once we add noise reduction, it cleans all of this up. Boom. We are almost there, guys. Let's check back for our reference, and holy cow, that is looking good. But we're not there yet. We can just keep pushing this further. All right, the red dress. So the reds that we're seeing in this image are a little bit faded, and that is what makes it the Queen's Gambit. So after looking at our image, it appears that there is a lot of red pushed into the shadows to the red parts of the image. So that is what we're gonna work on next. Click on your eyedropper, and now it's time to get keying with the reds. If you click on your magic wand, you'll be able to better see what it is that you're keying out. Here we go. Now I do want to clean this up just a little bit. So I'm going to denoise it, get some clean black, blur it out a little bit, clean white. I'm going to soften up the shadows and the highlights, and it looks like we are getting a really nice, clean key. And that is looking good. And guys, what I want to do, I want to take the shadows. I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like here. I'm pushing some of that rustic, vintage, orange, reddish into the image. So we're going to shift it there. Not too much, but just a little bit. Come over to my curves. Boop. Make sure editable splines is on. And I'm going to click at the bottom. That is just going to allow me to bring up the exposure of just the dress. Now let's check it out. It just lifts the dress a little bit and makes it pop. But when we look at our reference, things are a little desaturated too. So I'm gonna bring the color boost back down to match our hair. I do want to shift it over to that orange as well. All right, so our dress is starting to look nice. This is looking remarkable, guys. All right, now for the look adjustment. This is where we are going to start shifting it and pushing it into this world. So let's take another look at the color story. As you can see, we have these browns coming up in the shadows here. We have some of these pastel, muddy cashew colors happening here, and a lot of that was done on set, but we need to recreate it. So we need to shift some of these to the red, to the browns. And as you can see, the highlights have some of that milky salmon color in it. So that's what we're gonna recreate now, starting with the highlights. So we're gonna push it towards that salmon color that you see. And that looks good. Now I do want to put some of those cashew colors into the shadows that we saw. So I'm just going to slightly push them there. Those highlights can come back. All right, so this is before, this is after. As you can see, guys, we are starting to get there. These small changes are just making a big difference, but we're not done yet. And I do think that the temperature, I'm gonna just bring down just a little bit to dial back that yellow. It's not as prominent in this image as it is in our image. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna dial it back, bring the saturation down just a bit. So now to get that dreamy glow look that you see happening here, that you see in all those Roger Deakins movies. And you can do that by going over to your effects, coming over here and typing in glow. Drag glow onto your clip and watch what happens. You can see in the highlights and in some of our data here what is going on. So just looking at our data, we're getting really close. We do need to add some more blue, but our green and red is perfect. Our luminance is looking great. Now everything is so diffused in this clip, and that is what I'm trying to replicate here, how diffused the image looks. And a way you can replicate that is using this glow effect here, and just dial it back with the brightness, the spread, and the shine threshold. There we go. Now that is starting to come to life. All right, but we need to bring it back down to earth because this is really popping right now. So the way I'm gonna do that is add a vignette and add some pop to it. So I really need to pop this off of the page, just like this image is doing. We do need to make it pop just a little bit more to blend it. So I'm gonna make sure editable splines is on. Click on the top right. A button will populate that you can click on and drag up. This is how you get that pop, and this is how we get that lifted shadow look. Now I don't want to lift the shadows too much, just enough to keep them sitting perfectly where they're at. As you can see, that's already taking care of matching up our blue, green, and red channels. And look at this, guys, our data is almost identical. This is beautiful. All right, but we're not done yet. Next up, we are pulling out a vignette. Go to your power window, take a circle, and drag that bad boy on top. Stretch it all the way out. Make sure it is softened. Then you go over to your curves, come down to your shadows, click on the bottom, make sure editable splines is on, and then drag your shadows down. Now, I go all the way just to see what it is that I'm working with here. So I can go back into my power window, invert, and then drag back up all of the way. There we go. Now we're drawing a lot of the focus onto the center of the frame. All right, so I'm gonna sharpen it up. You go and click on these little teardrop triangle icons, go to your red channel, make sure that blur is selected, and then bring it down. I take it to about 47. You can get too sharp. Now the image we're looking at here is punchy but soft at the same time. And the way to do that is come over to your mid-tone detail and just bring it down. I'll bring it down too much and then bring it back. Too much and then bring it back. Right there. And now we're landing in that ballpark. To blend everything together and to get that vintage look, we have to add grain back into the image. So go over to your effects, type in grain, and film grain will pop up. Drop it onto your node. Once you've done that, go to your film grain presets and scroll all the way down to 35mm 40T. Now you'll notice that there is a lot of big grain in the Queen's Gambit. I do want to increase the grain size to try to match up the size of the grain we're seeing here. It is definitely soft grain, so I am going to soften out the grain a little bit, increase the grain strength, and then the grain texture a little bit. And now we're starting to really see the replication of grain happening here. And that is a subtle but very important detail to make it look like a film. So what I'm trying to do is get my skin tones a little bit closer to our Queen's Gambit girl here, Beth Harmon. And I'm gonna try to replicate that by removing the color from the shadows, which still keeps the life in the skin, but it does make it more neutral like her skin. And I can already tell that made a massive difference. That looks amazing. Wow. Just wow. Guys, that is our Queen's Gambit image. Now I'm gonna right click, grab a still, and then export this as a power grade. So if you guys want to have this exact setup, you can download the power grade. Yes, that means if you have DaVinci Resolve 17, you will take this power grade, put it into DaVinci Resolve, and you will have this exact setup. So let's go over this one more time. We did noise reduction to clean up the shadows, and then we moved to contrast just to match up our contrast with the image. After that, we pumped some color into the image to get everything looking nice and neutral. Once we did that, we enhanced it with HDR, and that is what really set us in the film era. We moved on to cleaning up the shadows, so we removed the color from just the darkest parts of the image. After that, we adjusted the skin tone, softened out the skin tone, and added some yellow to remove some of the pink. Yes, we cleaned up the whites in the skin here, removing colors just from the whites so it can look nice and diffused. Once we had that, we just touched up our dress and tried to really put it in the world of the Queen's Gambit, that old vintage red film look. After the dress was looking nice, this is our look adjustment. This is where we just subtly pushed it to that Queen's Gambit world, that vintage rustic look. After that, I wanted to pop it off the page, so we added some pop with some curves and the glow effect. To make things more balanced, I added a vignette around the edges. Once the vignette was complete, I added some sharpening and then some film grain to add noise back into the shadows to set it back into its proper era in which it belongs.
And boom, checkmate. But here's the video that you guys are going to want to watch next. If you are a commercial videographer and you want to learn how to land higher paying clients by just simply getting a higher quality look out of your color grades, well, watch this video and I break down how I color grade my commercials and my commercial interviews. This has led me to grow a 6-figure business in less than 6 months, shooting video. Something that I never knew that I would be doing because it was just a dream to me, but now it's reality. And I want to share what I've learned with you guys. So click this link, click that subscribe, like, dislike button if that's something you're into, but I will see you guys in the next video.